Hello friends, it's Mr. John here. I sure do miss seeing you, and I really wish I could have given you this church tour in person, but since I can't, let's make the best of it, and I'm going to make this video to give you a tour around St. Elizabeth and Seaton and show you a lot of the things that we use in Mass, what they're called and what they mean. Come on, let's have some fun. So here we are, we're coming into the church. And when we come into the church, by every door is something called a holy water font. Now there's no water in there right now, and well, that's because of, COVID-19. But normally there's a little bowl of holy water in there, and we dip our finger in the bowl, and then we make the sign of the cross and we bless ourselves. And that's to remind us of our baptism. And we do that as we come into the church because baptism has made us all a part of God's family. And because we're all a part of God's family, that means we're brothers and sisters to one another. And so we're kind of coming to a family dinner. We're coming to celebrate as family. We're not strangers, and we're not just, some random people all coming to church. We're family. Speaking of baptism, there's our baptismal font. This is where babies and even older people are baptized. Next to our baptismal font, we have something called the Paschal candle, or the Easter candle, and you can see it's very, very tall. And we light that Paschal candle at the Easter Vigil on Holy Saturday, and then we light it for every Mass during the Easter season. So that's until Pentecost. And that Easter candle, that Paschal candle, it symbolizes the light of Jesus' resurrection overcoming the darkness of death. We also light the Paschal candle at every funeral Mass and at every baptism for the same reason, to remember the symbolism that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection overcame death. Here, if you can see through the glass, maybe I can open it. There, now you can see it better. There's where we keep the different oils that we use for anointing. We anoint people in baptism, we anoint people in confirmation, and we also anoint people in the sacrament of the sick. So that's where we keep those oils. Now I'm looking towards the sanctuary. The sanctuary is that area set off by the 3 steps. It's raised above everything. Can you see it? And in the sanctuary, there's a couple things. There's the altar, the Theambo, the tabernacle, and some other things that we used to say Mass with, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. There's also a crucifix. Can you see the crucifix? In every church you'll find a crucifix because the Mass remembers Jesus' Last Supper and his death on the cross and also his resurrection. And that's why we at Seaton, we know that Jesus is among us, having risen from the dead. And so we have a very special statue of the risen Jesus hanging from our ceiling. Here, as I get closer to the altar, you can see this very pretty box behind the altar. And we call that a tabernacle. You might think, that's a funny name. Why is it called a tabernacle? Well, tabernacle in Hebrew means tent. And it was the place where they kept the Ark of the Covenant. This is going all the way back in the book of Exodus. The story of Moses, maybe you know it, when with God's help he led the ancient Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they wandered in the desert, and God gave Moses the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai and told him to fashion an Ark of the Covenant to put those 10 Commandments in. Well, that Ark of the Covenant was kept in a special tent called the Tent of Meeting, and only the priests were allowed in. And so regular people who couldn't go in saw that there was always a fire burning outside the tent. And that fire reminded all the people that God was dwelling with them. And so even today, we have a special candle called a sanctuary candle. And it's either red or it's white, but when it's lit and burning, like that is now, that tells us that Jesus is in the tabernacle, that we have consecrated hosts contained in that tabernacle. And even though we can't see them, that fire reminds us that they're there. Well, why do we keep those consecrated hosts in the tabernacle? Well, two reasons. One, sometimes someone's sick and they want to receive Holy Communion and they can't wait till the next Mass, or they can't get to Mass. So we're able to bring them Holy Communion from the tabernacle because those consecrated hosts were consecrated during a Mass. And the other reason is to pray because we believe that that's actually Jesus, right? His body, blood, soul, and divinity. And so we are in the presence of Jesus. And so people will sometimes just come and sit in Jesus' presence and pray. Now, have you ever seen, maybe in a picture or in a movie, when somebody's come into the presence of a king and they get down on one knee? And they do that as a sign of respect for the king. Well, Jesus Christ is our king. So when we come into church, it's very appropriate for us to get down on one knee before Jesus. And we call that genuflecting. And that's a Latin word. And it literally means to bend the knee. So when you come into church and you see that sanctuary lamp lit and you know that Jesus is present in the tabernacle, don't forget to bend a knee. Don't forget to genuflect. It shows respect and reverence for Jesus. So this is the ambo. And the ambo is where the readings are proclaimed at Mass and where the priest gives his homily. Now that's another funny word, isn't it? Ambo. Well, you know what? That's an old Greek word. And it means an elevation or even a mountain. And the reason for that is, once upon a time, microphones hadn't been invented yet. And so, and in some really old churches, like if you've ever been in maybe the Baltimore Basilica, but in some really, really old churches that were built before there were microphones, you can see that the ambo is way up high. In fact, the person going up to it might have to climb 6 or 7 steps to get up to it. And the reason for that is so that they could almost shout, and their voice would carry all the way to the back of the church, and people would be able to hear the readings. Well, now we have microphones. But even so, you can see the ambo is still up a couple steps. It's still elevated. Now I'm going to come up those steps and show you what's on the ambo. Have you ever wondered what it looks like from the other side? Well, here you go. This is what it looks like. And the lector, who's the person doing the readings, or the priest or the deacon, this is their view of Mass. So here on the ambo is a very special book, and it's called the lectionary. And the lectionary contains all the different readings we do at Mass. And you see it's open already for this coming Sunday, the 4th Sunday of Lent. And there's the first reading. It's a long first reading. But if I were to turn the page, you'd find the responsorial psalm, the second reading, and the gospel. And that's all contained in the lectionary. Oftentimes you'll see the deacon process into Mass carrying a book high above his head. This is the book, the lectionary. Okay, now let's talk about the altar. You can see the altar cloth right now is purple. And that's because we're in this season of Lent. Now in Advent and Lent, The altar cloth is purple. The different colors actually are for different seasons in the church's year, or for different feast days. I'll tell you about those a little bit later. But every church has an altar. And again, this goes all the way back to the very first book in the Bible, in Genesis, where God tells Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, his name was changed to Israel, to build altars and offer sacrifices to God on those altars. And then in the book of Exodus, with Moses and the Hebrew people wandering through the desert, they also would construct an altar to God where they would offer their sacrifices. Now today, we still offer sacrifice. In fact, sometimes you'll hear the Mass called the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. And if you've ever paid attention, the priest begins the liturgy of the Eucharist by inviting us all to stand and he says, "Pray, my sisters and brothers, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father." Well, what's the sacrifice being offered? Well, the first is a representation of Jesus' sacrifice. His sacrifice for us, dying on the cross for us, so that our sins could be forgiven and we could have eternal life with God in heaven. But what's our sacrifice? Remember, the priest said that his sacrifice and ours may be pleasing to God. Well, what sacrifice do we bring to the Mass? Well, we're supposed to bring our whole week, all our actions, all our good deeds. Every time we've done something out of love for God or love for someone else, that's our sacrifice. And we're supposed to kind of bring those with us to every Mass and offer them to God out of love for Him. Now, as we come around the altar, coming back up here again, do you see this special white cloth laid out with the red embroidered cross in it? It almost looks like a very big fancy napkin. Well, that's called a corporal, and it represents the burial shroud of Jesus. Corporal is actually Latin for of the body. So when they would wrap the body, preparing it for burial, they would wrap it in something called a corporal. And so we use that still today. And this book, with all these bookmarks and all these different thumb tabs, see all those? This is called the Roman Missal. And this is all the parts of the Mass that the priest says. It's all in here. So we're set up for daily Mass this week. This was today, Wednesday. And here's Thursday. But all the prayers the priest needs in order to say Mass are contained here in the Roman Missal. Now, have you ever noticed these white and gold? They almost look like pictures, but not really. All around the church. There's 14 of them, and they're called the Stations of the Cross. And they remind us of everything Jesus suffered on Good Friday, from the time he was condemned to death by Pontius Pilate until he was buried in the tomb. And on Fridays during Lent, we come together and we actually pray and meditate on the Stations of the Cross and remember everything that Jesus suffered. Well, why do we do that? Why would we want to remember suffering? Well, what we're really remembering is the reason why Jesus allowed all these sufferings to happen to him. And that reason is simply because he loves us. And he wanted to save us. And he wanted us to be able to be with him forever in heaven. And here's some of our beautiful stained glass windows. Have you ever wondered why there's stained glass windows in churches? Well, the reason, again, goes back to a long, long time ago. And a long, long time ago, believe it or not, most people, grown-ups, did not know how to read. And so they would put the important stories of Jesus' life in the windows. And so people could learn about Jesus by having the pictures explained to them. And here we have a statue of Mary, our Blessed Mother. And on the other side of the church, way over there, we have a statue of St. Joseph, Mary's husband, Jesus' foster father. Well, why do we have these statues? Well, you have to remember that our church, as a Catholic church, not our building, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, but the Catholic Church is very, very, very old, right? And it existed long before there were photographs. And so we would make statues and put them in our churches so that we could remember important people like Mary and Joseph and other different saints. And the last thing I want to show you in here are the pews. Now, our church at St. Elizabeth Ann Seton is different than most churches. Most churches have long, hard benches that people sit in. We have cushy, comfy, individual chairs. But whether the church has long benches or individual chairs, they're called pews. And that's where the people who are attending Mass sit. So these are the pews. So remember when I told you that the different colors mean different things or represent different seasons? Have you ever seen this hanging behind our statue of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton? So if we look at the circle, and we start at the very top where the cross is pointing, that little purple slice represents Advent. The first Sunday of Advent is the beginning of the church year. And then as we move clockwise, we come to the Christmas season. And then after the Christmas season, green represents ordinary time. And then we come into the season of Lent, which is where we are now. And then the Easter season. And then a big stretch of ordinary time again until we get back to Advent. Okay, there's something kind of cool in the usher's closet I want to show you. And it's this right here. Have you ever been to Mass where they've used incense? Some people really like it and think it smells really good, and other people think it's really kind of stinky. Well, this is where you keep it. Here is the incense itself. And that container that's holding it is just called an incense boat. And then you can see back here, there's little circle discs of charcoal. And we put those in here and light the charcoal, and then sprinkle the incense on top of it. And then this can be waved like that as someone carries it to spread the smelly smoke around. And that's swinging right there that holds the charcoal and burns the incense is called the thurible. Another funny name, right? It comes from the Latin word that just means incense. Okay, now we're in the work sacristy. And there's lots of things that we keep in the work sacristy. Let me show you a few of them. This that looks like a plate is called a paten. and it's what the host that the priest consumes is placed on during Mass. This is the chalice, and the chalice is, of course, where the wine that becomes the blood of Christ is kept. These two little pitchers are called cruets, and they hold the water and the wine before they're mixed in the chalice. And then you may have noticed the priest also uses some water to pour over his hands that he then dries with the towel, and that bowl captures that water. This is the monstrance, and we put a consecrated host into the middle of it, right there. And that's used for Eucharistic adoration and benediction when people want to gaze on Jesus and pray. This, with the lid, is called the ciborium. And that is where the consecrated hosts are kept. And it has a lid on it. And in fact, when you receive your first Holy Communion, you will probably receive it from a priest, Father Paul, or one of the deacons holding one of the ciboria. Another funny word, right? Ciboria? Where does that come from? Well, you're not going to believe this, but it's Latin for food, right? Okay. A couple of other cloths. This is a folded up corporal, just like the one we saw on the altar. And this one here, you can see it's even a little stained. It's called a purificator, and it's used to wipe the rim of the chalice in between different people receiving the precious blood of Christ. Up here, see those little disc-shaped things? That's called a pyx, P-I-X. And when someone takes Holy Communion to the sick, that's what they take it in. A special container called a pyx. See all these? Those are the boxes that the hosts come in. And then over here, check it out, we have some extra chalices and patens. And over here, we have a few more extra chalices and extra ciboria. Now, what's weird or interesting, or I don't know, but these are ciboria too. Even though they're on stems and you might think they're chalices, they're not, they're ciboria. And the reason you can tell is they have a lid on them. See the cross in the lid? So they're ciboria, not chalices. Oh, look at all this. Look at all these cleaning supplies. Look at the disinfectant spray and the rags and the gloves and the hand sanitizer and the bleach and the spray bottles. We use all of this to completely clean and sanitize the church after every single Mass. So we're trying to make it as safe as possible for everybody who wants to come back to Mass. Okay, so now we're coming into the vesting sacristy, and this is where the priest and deacon put on those special garments that you see them wearing during Mass. And the first garment they put on is called an alb. And you see it's white. And it's called an alb because albus in Latin means, well, white. And then they tie this rope around their waist. That's called a cincture. And guess what cincture means in Latin? It means a belt. Then they put on the stole. Now the priest stole goes around his neck and hangs down in front of him on either side, and the deacon stole goes over his shoulder and clasps together on one side. And again, the different colors represent the different liturgical seasons. And then over all that, the priest puts the chasuble. See all the different chasubles here. Let me see if I can pull one out for you. They kind of look like, I don't know, ponchos, maybe? Well, why are they called chasubles? Well, again, it's a Latin word, and it means, believe it or not, little house. So the chasuble is like a little house. Again, the different colors for the different liturgical seasons. Okay, friends, so that's our tour of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a few things, and we'll see you real soon. Bye-bye. We miss you.